Welcome everyone to our mid-course webinar. We're gonna wait about 10 seconds or so. Everybody else have the opportunity to join us. I did put an icebreaker question in the chat box. If you could, do say hello. And what is your current favorite show that you're watching? And for many of you, just as a reminder, do make sure that you select all panelists and attendees on your chat box in order for everyone to see your responses. So in the chat box, if you could just say hello and let us know, what is your current favorite show? Hi, Gilm. Hi, Blanca. Nice. Are we muted? I don't think so, but you can change to all panelists and attendees. Does it not let you? Divya said, Money Heist and Jack Ryan. I loved Money Heist. I think I binge watched Money Heist. Hi, Freddie. It's quite a show. Real life is quite a show. Yes, real life is quite a show. Absolutely. Nice to see you as well, Audie. We have here Matthias. My favorite show is The Witcher. I will have to catch that. Peter said Brooklyn 99. Daniel said Blacklist. I don't know if I've seen that yet. Hi, Fer. Hi, everybody. What is currently your favorite show? And if you're not watching a show right now, that's absolutely fine. I mean, could be something you watched previously. Space Force by Claus. Arenza said Person of Interest. Ben said House MD and Black Mirror. You know, Black Mirror, I watched a couple episodes and some of the episodes really start to get creepy for me. I like House MD because of the main character, but I only seen a couple of those as well. Katarina said Defending Jacob. Christian said Ozark. Oh, Ozark's a good one as well. I think we just wrapped up season 2. And Lauren went with the classics, HBO Sopranos. Steve said Hell's Kitchen. I love Hell's Kitchen. Great show. Always could laugh. Arinza said also Ozark as well, right? Freddie's agreeing with Ozark. Fur is with Games of Thrones, right? Games of Thrones is a long journey, right? I promise you, as my questions I keep asking these type of questions, and people are wondering, like, what does our favorite shows have to do with anything? But it will reconnect eventually, right? And last one we have here, Regina, I love La Casa de Papel. Oh, you know, someone else mentioned that on the very top. I forgot who mentioned that as well, that as being one of their favorite shows as well. I think it's Gal at MO. I'm not sure who that is, but when you guys put your email address, I can't figure out who it is. And Roberto said Homeland, fantastic. So these are all great shows. Some of them I'm familiar with, and some of them are also my favorite. And if you do not know some of these shows that your peers are entering into the chat box, feel free to look it up and learn more about each of these shows. So some of you, Nadeem said Designated Survivor. Just as a reminder, if you do not know what I'm talking about, I'm referring to these shows that your peers are entering, they make sure that you do put all panelists and attendees so everyone can see your favorite show, right? So Nadeem, thank you, great job. Diego said Dark is very good. I wonder what Dark is on. Is that on Netflix, Diego? I'm curious. All right. So let's begin today's webinar agenda. All right, so it is on Netflix. I will have to check it out. What do we have for today's webinar? We're gonna do a reconnect. Let's see how everybody's doing. How's it going? I already know how it's going for some of you because I've received some of your emails. We've been in communication. I've read your discussion boards. We're gonna take a moment to also reflect and go a little bit deeper about what it is that you learned and applied in your negotiation activities. And then I'm going to share some IDG user tips. I know that many of you are experiencing challenges with IDG. It's very common, actually. So I say it's common because it is not the perfect platform. We talked about that in our first opening webinar, but it is the only platform that is currently available that allow us to engage in these negotiation simulations and be able to collect the results to provide the debriefings that you get at the end of each activity. So I still will provide some tips for you on how to really navigate these challenges that we can't seem to address completely yet, right? And then hopefully you feel recharged to continue on to week 5 and the rest of the weeks until we see each other for our final webinar. Okay. So what are you learning so far? In the chat box, again, make sure you put all panelists and attendees. Tell me, what are you learning so far about yourself or even about influencing or negotiation? One thing you say that kind of sticks to your mind so far, the first 4 weeks of this course, that you've learned about yourself or about negotiation and influencing. So in the chat box, tell me, what is it about negotiation or what is it about yourself you've learned thus far in the past 4 weeks as you've gone through each of these modules? One main thing, right? Daniel said, preparation is key. Absolutely. Christian said, listen to my counterpart more. Diego, along with Christian, preparation. Freddie said, I've learned a lot more. Fantastic. A little bit more than you started off from the opening webinar, right? Blanca said, I've liked a lot of the game theory articles. Oh, yes, I agree. The articles are absolutely, it allows you to kind of connect the dots really well. Rishma as well agreed with everybody else. Preparation is important. Learning the main concepts of what it means to be in distributed bargaining, some of those terminologies. I think others said, I learned don't be afraid to negotiate and there are good techniques. Leticia said, I have to be realistic. Oh, that's a really good one. We sometimes really stick to this idol or this idea of how things would go. And then when it goes the opposite direction, how do we really respond to that? Freddie, similar to previous comments, learning how to listen or just listening, the importance of it. Nadeem said being cooperative and understanding isn't always about all you can win, right? The first and investigative negotiation is key, similar to Peter. Investigative questions, being engaging in that inquiry process, asking people's question. Freddie said the art of persuasion is an amazing concept. Benchmarking and preparation again. So some of you put on here anchoring. We're going to talk about anchoring, how it leads to BATNA, and how do we really determine that as well. But two said understand the interests of your counterpart. And I hope you're able to get to the idea of my icebreaker question about many of you who put in there listening to your counterpart, understanding your counterpart, connecting with your counterpart. I'm not saying going into your counterparts and ask them what's your favorite show, right? But I am asking you to take a moment and connect with your counterparts. Take a moment and understand that they are a real person and they have other interests as well. And those interests can be similar to yours, but you must start asking them questions to uncover how much do you have in common and in what aspects can you also serve them in regards to what is it they want out of the negotiation process. Like I said, it's not about asking the favorite show, but it's really start engaging and learning how to ask certain questions and figuring out the other counterparts. Regina said, try to improve relationship to improve liking influence principle. Liking is a lot easier said than it is done. We can say, hey, like me. And whether your counterparts really like you is another factor. But what really enforces liking are the commonalities that we uncover about each other, right? So I noticed that immediately when someone put Ozarks on there, I love Ozark and I love Games of Thrones. I am automatically think, oh, not that I like you less, but I feel like I like you more. I feel like we have more similarity. And that similarity attraction theory, a lot of research has found, really increases this perception of liking in our mind and in our feelings as well, how we feel about somebody. So we're going to go through liking and how liking can be enhanced through negotiation. Romero said trust and main points and how is one. Absolutely. Trust was critical during the process. And today's webinar, we're going to talk about trust as well. So I'm so glad that these are some of the elements that some of you highlighted as your greatest learning moments, but I'm going to expand on it in today's webinar as well. Okay. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper on those core concepts that you just mentioned in the chat box. We're going to take it a little bit further and say, hey, I do have this light bulb moment, this aha moment, but how can I apply it more effectively and more realistically? Especially, I think maybe Leticia mentioned that as well. How can I do it more authentically? And how do I understand myself as I go through this process, as much as I'm trying to understand my counterpart, as they're also trying to understand me? Do remember that as you're trying to do this with them, they are also trying to do the same thing with you. And how can you reach a point where it's mutual, that you can understand each other and have those types of conversation or communication? Or what can you do in advance to be more prepared as you go into negotiation, besides just doing research, right? Right. So let's start off with the very first activity that you did in week 1. Right. So some of you played rock, paper, scissors before. I remember reading the discussion boards, and some of you said, yeah, I played this many times as my childhood, and others said, I've never played this in my life. I like to always think about the cultural differences that actually emerges during this activity. For those who never played it before, you had to rely on the information that was provided to you to learn how to play. And to some aspect, if you're able to communicate with your counterpart, trust that your counterpart is sharing the correct information as well. Now, for those who played rock, paper, scissors their entire lives, starting from their early childhood, your assumptions of how to play the game also hindered your opportunity to really cooperate and expand on winning this game a little bit differently. Okay. And the same thing as we think about negotiation. Our assumptions about how negotiation should unfold does influence how we engage in negotiation with our counterparts. So similar to here, many of you tend to think that negotiation is about just win all you can. It is quite competitive, less cooperation. But what they've shown in this particular activity is that the more you cooperate, the more you collude, the more likely it is that you'll win these results or get, in essence, the outcome that you're going for. So I went ahead and posted the rock, paper, scissors winners on here. We have German and Roberto as the top winners, but as you can see here, German and his partner Jean, are they here? Are you guys here in this webinar? So you played 46, or you played 47 rounds and won 46 out of them. So you do win a gift card. If you do not mind sharing, did you and Jean agreed that you will split the prize in this particular activity? I'm curious to know. So one of the elements of this aspect is, Germans, I offered him that afterwards. Okay, so there was no initial agreement at the beginning. So sometimes what happened is some of the players or participants, before they go in, they had this discussion and said, hey, let me be the one to win all the rounds. And we're going to play as fast as we can, because we also not only want me to win all the rounds, but we want to make sure that we play as many rounds as possible compared to every one of our peers in this class. So speed is important, as you remember hearing Professor Kieran talk about in the video, but also trust. Trust that, for instance, the reward that you get will be shared. At this point, I'm not sure if Jean really asked you if you're going to share in the beginning, but you were willing to kind of share the prize at the end, which is also showing commitment to your counterpart. Trust can be built afterwards, is what you do afterwards. So I do want to say congratulations to both of these groups, Michael, Roberto, Gina, German, and their ability to cooperate and collude through this process and have those types of approaches in mind before going to something that many of you played before, right? So think about negotiation as something new. Do not go into it with every other mindsets that you've had prior about negotiation. And what are some of the challenges that you have in negotiation, and learn to kind of let that pass, build some new techniques and strategies that you're learning in this particular course, right? German said, we agreed on using the same set through the entire game. Fantastic. And that also increases your speed if you just said, I'm going to stay with paper, you're going to stay with rock the entire time, right? So there was a strategy in hand, an agreement, communication, trust, and also willing to share the prize at the end. So negotiation is not in essence by chance, neither is rock, paper, scissors. But the more we're willing to help each other, the more that we actually get to win both. And that means everyone gets to win, both of you. So again, congratulations. And I love rock, paper, scissors. And I remember reading many of the discussion boards that simple game, simple activity, and a very simple experience, but very meaningful and powerful outcome because it really does challenge what you thought you knew going into this. And a lot of times, what makes us kind of have those light bulb aha moments is when we're experiencing things that challenge our prior or existing assumptions. So continue to do that as you go through your negotiation. So for others who are not cooperating rock paper scissors, do not feel bad that you didn't win. It's fantastic you have some of your participants or peers that did win. But just to let you know, cooperating is actually not natural. It's not something that we do automatically. It actually requires a lot of effort on our part to cooperate. So the real question to understand how can we cooperate more in the future in our negotiation that we have with counterparts or anybody that we engage with is why is naturally cooperating so hard for us? One of the key factor is, well, cooperation requires us to be vulnerable. And vulnerability is not comfortable. Vulnerability makes us an easy target. Vulnerability makes us feel anxious. Vulnerability makes us afraid. So all these types of emotions can emerge, right? And it also creates this a little bit of tenseness. And we try to avoid those. So these are emotions that we spend a lot of time avoiding. And actually, it is ingrained in us our defense mechanism to avoid those types of emotions. Therefore, we have to fight those in order to engage in cooperation. The other aspects of why cooperation is not natural for many of us is that there's this fear of betrayal. If you have cooperated in the past with others and you were betrayed, or for instance, they broke their trust with you, the likelihood of you cooperating in the future situations or events is going to be slim, right? So you have to figure out, well, how can I get that fear to decrease? How can I be more open to the possibility that, yes, betrayal can happen, but I can also bounce back from it. It's not in essence something that we can say is guaranteed that someone will not betray you through the process, but do know that you can be more prepared and bounce back if someone does betray you, right? So how do we really uncover those strong emotions and be comfortable with those strong emotions are going to help us feel a little bit more natural when we want to cooperate or even engage in cooperation. Other things I want to share in terms of cooperation is I like to think about real life events of where cooperation is beyond just negotiation or lack of cooperation is beyond negotiation. It actually happens in our daily activities. I'm going to actually start with the far right hand side. As you can see in the far right hand side, there's this image that says recycling, it's easy, right? And we're trying to influence and convince others to recycle. In the United States, recycling has become a common thing now. Recycling, I have a recycling bin in my house. The building that I have has a unit where you have your trash can and you have also an area you can relieve for others to pick up for the recycling bin. Houses now have two separate trash cans. It's becoming a normal thing, right? Because it becomes socialized to be acceptable. But it wasn't always the case in the very beginning. I would give you the story when I was traveling in Cambodia and I was working for a non-government organization. And if you're not familiar with Cambodia, it's a third world country, and they're at this place where if you walk outside in the major cities, this was about maybe 13 years ago. I was walking around and there was trash everywhere. And I was just so confused on why there was so much trash everywhere. Plastic wraps, you can see bag chips, plastic bags, and things like that. So when I was traveling with my group, I would have a snack, and after I finished my snack, I started stuffing it in my pocket, my coat jacket pocket, my jean pocket, my pants pocket. And then when I saw a trash can, I would run up to it and start dumping out my trash out of my pockets. And at that time, my colleagues were locals, they were Cambodians at that time, in that group. And they all started to look at me strange. And then I had family members who were there as well, who live in Cambodia. And they started saying, you know, Mia is so strange. She stuffed trash in her pockets and then she throws it around, throws it into the trash can when she sees it. And they started laughing. And I asked them, I said, well, why is it that you choose to just throw trash on the floor? Why is it that you don't throw it in the trash can? And they said, well, it's just easier. And secondly, I'm only one person that's doing this. But one person is thinking, I'm the only one throwing it. It's not going to lead to a major impact. Um, this is the same thing they call the tragedy of the commons. And in essence, is that if one person thought that I'm only one person throwing trash, that they do not see the mass impact it has on the entire country of Cambodia and the entire world it has on how we take care of our world, our environment. And it has these negative consequences that we tend to think of only what we do has impact to us and not to others. The other example I want to give you is the piracy, software piracy, music piracy, movie piracy. So some of these shows that you mentioned that you love watching, are you watching it through Netflix? Are you watching it through HBO? Or are you watching it through some kind of streams that is free, that you find through a third party? You don't have to tell me where you're watching it. But think about it this way. Netflix, movies, these actors, these actresses, these music artists, they're working really hard to produce these products, whether it's art, whether it's music, whether it's movies. And there's also people who are production teams, people who are the camera crew, these people who are the writers, other people who are part of these projects. And every time a single person chooses to download a movie or a music illegally, is taken away from the funding that is available to those who work hard, employment for those who work for those projects. So just remember, it's not just about you who's benefiting and saving $10, $20, or $30, whatever it is, the amount for that particular product or service, but you're impacting a greater group who's depending on it. The last example I want to share here is cooperation about wearing masks. In terms of this unfortunate event we're in right now, very interesting times, right? We have a lot of things happening, but one of them is the pandemic of COVID-19. And we have to wear masks in the United States here. I'm sure where you're at, you're maybe wearing masks as well. But there's also the challenge of not just asking people to wear masks, but asking them to wear it properly. And why some people choose to wear it more improper than properly is because it's not something they're used to. It's not something they feel cool, or we like to say hip in some other languages. So a lot of the youngsters are having difficulty wearing the mask completely, and they're trying to make it socially acceptable. So similar to recycling is easy, wearing masks is cool. You see these new masks that are flyers that are showing around how to wear a mask properly, and that is right, is safety for all. You see slogans saying things like, we're all in this together, so wear your mask properly. Because your action of wearing the mask improperly, you're thinking, well, it's just me, but you're not sure and you're not aware of how just your action can impact a greater community of the spreading of this virus. So I'm just giving you an example of why naturally cooperating is so hard. It can be as simple as our everyday activities, from recycling, the things that some of us do. I think about my early years as teenagers, what I did illegally down. Don't ever say this, but now I'm learning, like, oh my God, I'm having an impact to a community bigger than just about me. And the same thing goes with the mask. And the same thing goes with negotiation. It requires us to really go against what we're used to. It requires us to really go against our natural tendencies in order for us to want to cooperate. Blanca said there was a very funny image sent in Spain comparing wearing the nose outside with versus wearing underwear incorrectly. It was sent by the health authority. It's a very interesting one. It probably caught their attention and in comparisons, right? But the idea is to get people to cooperate. Wanting people to cooperate is a lot harder than we really think it is. It's not as simple as let's cooperate and people do it. As you can see here from rock, paper, scissors, it seems so simple. Why didn't I do that? But many of you went with what you're used to and what you're comfortable with. So break that cycle, avoid tragedy of the commons, and focus on how can I put more effort into cooperate. So let's say that's not the way it's going to work for me. What can I do to convince other to cooperate? So when will other tend to cooperate? And one way to do that is, one is that there's social acceptance, social desirability. I want to look desirable to others. I want to engage in acceptable behaviors by society. The other is seeing how it benefits them, right? That's very important. We are very self-centered human beings. And what I mean by self-centered is we're very focused on what can we get out of this. If we can share and communicate how they can benefit through this cooperation, then we're more likely to cooperate and less resistance to not, right? And you want to make sure that the benefit is not long term, but also immediate and how it impacts them directly. To say that we're saving the environment, to say that we're preventing this virus from spreading to others may not necessarily be enough for somebody. It could be that we're saving the not yourself, your life, your own life, but also your loved ones, your wife, your husband, your kids, your parents, the people that you interact with every day. You know, cooperation is key here. It's not just about protecting everyone outside, but also protecting your immediate family. For those who value, you know, family, their immediate family, this is more meaning for them. This is how it's going to benefit them. Others could be so that we can go back to work. Some people love to be working in their office spaces. Others is so we can go back to eating in restaurants. I'm a foodie. I love food. So we can open back up and do these things, right? That's a little bit more long term, but if you want to think about short term, I always think about my own self in the center. What am I going to get out of it? Knowing how to communicate with them will allow them to see why cooperation is more beneficial than it is to not cooperate, right? So how can we make cooperation more self-enforcing? Understanding the tragedy of the commons, these are typical, very natural social dilemmas that we engage in. Being aware of it is going to help you address some of these challenges that you have. And then there's also the prisoner's dilemma, which we'll talk about next. Okay. And the prisoner's dilemma came out of the second activity that you engaged in called Win as much as you can. And you're like, well, that's kind of a deceiving activity name and title, because I was under the assumption that I should win as much as I can, right? So tell me, when you engaged in this activity in the chat box, what was your initial strategy? Was it to always cooperate no matter what? So were you more cooperative strategy? Were you always defect no matter what? Were you a defector, or you were using a defector strategy? Well, you cooperate first and you copy the last move, and that's called tit for tat. Then we have cooperate first until the opponent defects, right? Then I punish them, then I'm a soft grudger. Similar to the first one, cooperating at first, until someone defect, and after that I just continue defecting, so I'm a grim trigger. Suspicious tit for tat is defect on the first move, and then I got to see what everybody else is doing before I decide what my next move is. So I'm a much more a watcher, but I'm defecting immediately. Similar to suspicious for tit for tat, heart majority, I defect at first, I continue defecting if the number of defection is higher or equal, and then maybe I'll cooperate if ever I see a lot of people cooperating, not just one or two people cooperating. And then there's the prober. I have no idea what I'm going to do. I'm just going to see what everybody else is doing, and then I'm going to play that strategy, right? So let's see what everybody put down here. You have Sarabi said, always cooperated. Leticia said, exactly, did what I did. What I did is win as much as you can. You're building trust by doing what you're saying to them. Oz said he cooperated. Bhavna said, always cooperated. Ramiro cooperated. Divya said, it was calculating, if we collude, then we can win more. Okay. Diego said, strategy to win. Blanca said, I waited and anticipate the next move. So you were much of a more prober, Blanca. Rashma said, cooperate as always. Leticia said, I have to stick to what I've said. So I'm assuming that you said why throughout the entire time. Christian said, anticipate the move and try to win. The prober, okay? Nadim, cooperate first. You can always defect later, given not one time off, right? So many of you said cooperated. Others said I defected. Some of you said I was a prober. I wanted to see what others were doing. Guillermo said defect first and wait to see if cooperate would be the best move. So you were much more on the suspicious side or the hard majority. So we have different strategies, but there seem to be a very common ones amongst you guys. is the prober and the cooperative. We have a few that were tit for tat. And then Lucas, you're a soft grudger, right? You're the one that's like, I'm going to cooperate. And then if you defect, I'm going to punish you. All right. Keep that in mind, Lucas. Okay. Alexandra will all lose a lot. Yes, you all will lose a lot if you keep defecting, absolutely. Right. But for those who are cooperating, fantastic. Now let's see what it looks like for some of you. Okay. So here are the results for one particular group, and the very group here in the top chart are all the groups. There were 6 of them that chose Y. So this is when everyone chose to cooperate. And what does that look like when we all chose to cooperate? And I will be honest with you, as many times I've done negotiating influence courses, this is the largest number of groups that cooperated, and there was a total of 6 of you. So fantastic work on that. And what happens when the entire group member cooperates is that you reach the maximum total points that a group can earn together, and there's equal distribution. So there's fairness, that was trust that was built. So if your group was the one that did Y all the way through and got 100 points, fantastic job, because that's the maximum amount of points that you can achieve in this particular activity. Now, let's say you had a couple of those that defected in the beginning, right? And we'll say here, all these, if you look at the second result, all these members in this particular group were all defectors in the beginning. They were defectors, they were either the hard majority, right? Or in essence, they were the ones that said, I need to see, they could be the prober here, but they start off with defecting, first round straight defecting, okay? So what happens when the majority defects? As you can see here, the total group points is negative at a negative 88. I chose this particular group is because they had the largest negative points as a group. There were other groups that also had defectors and they had negative 68 and so on. But I went and chose with this one because they had the largest number of defectors. And in this case, all players lose points. So this is what Alexandra was talking about. Like, oh, when we defected, we kept losing points. Not one player gained any points in this particular group. The other groups, we had some that were negative points for some players, and then maybe have a player in the group that had positive points, and they were the only member that won. But this is the case where every member chose to defect, and only one time that someone chose to choose a Y, and that was in round 5 when it was the point when you could actually win more points. Only one person chose. But prior to round 5, none of the players in this group gave any indication that they were going to change to Y. At this point, this member said, I'm going to see if I play Y, if anybody follow. When this member played Y and the rest of the team still continued to play X, you can see that they continued on to go back to Y. And then the game ended with all players defecting, right? So let's look at another set of results. Let's say that we have some suspicious tit for tat. These are people who defects first, right? So here in round 1, we had one player that was a suspicious tit for tat. So, but the rest of you were quite cooperative in this particular group. So this member started off with X and realized, oh, wow, everyone chose Y but me. So then that round 2, they started they started to put a Y as well. And they continue to put Y all the way at the end. Now, did they reach their maximum possible points of 100 as a group? No. But at this particular point, this player was able to understand what the rules were, and they followed the rules as they continue playing all the way to round 10 and received 96 points. But that defection early on did give them more points than their counterparts or the other players in the groups. This is when members can either learn to forgive and say it's okay, they end up cooperating the rest of the rounds, or they can be viewed as, wow, you end up getting more of this. And it could be a lesson learned for many players at this point of time. Gilmer said, I played this group. On our defense, the platform didn't open to the video before rounds 5, 7, and 10. So everybody defected because they changed the position alone and could make you lose more. All right. So I'm assuming that was the previous group that had all the X's. And, that's absolutely fine. But I wonder if it still could have changed somewhere in some agreement, some preparation to communication and what were the agreements prior to joining the activity. Just remember, even if IDG doesn't work really well in the videos, if there were open communication and preparation, you can do it via Slack, you can do it via email or in your peer circle and say, hey, everybody, let's stick to why and see what happens. And then during those technical difficulties, it's always interesting to see. It's also very common that some people go, well, I don't know what to do now. Maybe I should do X, right? And that happens as well. And then you can talk about it and go, what made you change to X after we agreed to stick to Y? And some of these players will say, well, I got nervous. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know we changed our minds in round 5 and round 8 during those bonus rounds and what happened, right? So look at this last group here that got 28 points, right? And this particular player 3 got 61 points, okay? Because they defected during the bonus rounds, right? And they were able to maximize their points to 61. But their players in their group, their team players got negative 11. They didn't receive any points while this one player benefited because they strategically defected during the bonus rounds. So what could have the other players done to player 3, right? Because if you notice, player 1, player 2, and player 4 cooperated all through these rounds, all 10 rounds. They never changed their position. And you're thinking, well, that's the point. I cooperated. I've done what I'm supposed to do. It was this particular player, player 3, that chose not to cooperate in these rounds. So all said, we decided on that strategy and it was perfect cooperation. But what could you have done to a player that chooses to defect? Do you choose to continue to remain in the same strategy, and that is cooperation? Or do you engage in a new strategy to understand and reevaluate the norms or the guidelines, in essence, the agreement of this that you started off in the beginning of this activity? I think about this in negotiation in the very beginning. When you start off, you talk to your counterparts and you have these initial agreements. Sometimes the initial agreements stay abided. In essence, we follow it, we respect it, we actually stick to those rules. And then there are other times where we understood the rules, we agreed on these rules, but through the process, one of us breaks those rules. Do we say that's okay and we continue to allow them to break those rules? Or do we engage in some kind of behavior to let them know, no, these behaviors are unacceptable. We agreed on this. So therefore, we need to make sure that we understand what the agreement is. So for you, if you find that yourself in this situation right here, where you have somebody who goes against the rules, the best strategy is not to actually stay cooperative all through round 10, even though it sounds ideal and what you've been learning. And you can see the outcomes did not benefit you for all those who stayed in cooperation all through the 10 rounds. So negative 11, negative 11, negative 11. While this particular person benefited all the way to 61. I'm not saying this person is bad. So what could you have done differently, right? And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So the game theories are there, right? This is an exact example of prisoner's dilemma, where people tend to engage in something that can benefit them, and their benefit is only for them, and their benefits if the other partner suffers. But just remember that when it's 10 rounds, cooperation works really well. Collaborating works really well. But when does defection works well? Anybody knows? In the chat box. Diva said when there's just one round. When there's shorter negotiation, absolutely. When there is just one round, one transaction, defection is absolutely fine. So fewer rounds, less consequences. If we want to transfer this into real life negotiation, we're talking about long-term relationship. Absolutely, Neha. It is, if you're planning to engage in continuous negotiation with your counterparts, cooperation is essential. But if it's just a one-time transaction, you'll most likely never see this person, then defection is absolutely acceptable and almost in an instance, the best strategy because you'll get the most points. Okay, so fantastic. As I'm losing my voice as I'm talking through this. So Amin, Neha, you're absolutely right. Alexandra said, I didn't see that play Y was not collaborating. I really missed that point. And that's absolutely fine. Now you have a new aha moment. Okay, so let's go back to the question about what happens when someone defects and why is that cooperating all 10 rounds may not be ideal, right? One of the things you can do is engage in a tit for tat strategy. If we go back and look at that table, the tit for tat strategy actually came about in the 1970s when there was that experiment that was done in the computer programming. And one particular participant or subject named Anatol Rappaport decided that he's going to cooperate in the first round and continue to cooperate in as long as no member or a counterpart defected or in essence rebel, right? So what did this person do in order to make sure that this person who defected comes back on board and follow the rules and guideline? They actually retaliated in a very effective and constructive way. That means reinforcing the rules. In that essence, this means I'm going to play X so that way you cannot benefit and you're going to actually lose points as well. We're all going to lose points. Play nice so we all can win, but I'm not going to continue to play nice and allow you to continuously win. So going back and looking at that particular chart where everyone kept selecting Y, you play nice, but you let the person continue to engage in incorrect behavior or behaviors that you do not agree with in the negotiation process. And there was no form of respectful punishment for them engaging in X's or in essence defecting in your activity. You want to make sure that when you retaliate or actually punish them for engaging in this behavior, they're still respectful, but also in a way that they understand why this behavior is unacceptable and what are the consequences of them engaging in this type of behavior and what is it you expect them to engage in. Remind them what are the benefits of engaging in cooperation. Going back to the exercise we talked about earlier is like letting them know what is the power of cooperation, how it benefits them immediately in short term. Now, once they start cooperating, do not continue to engage in retaliation or punishment of them. Forgive them, right? Let them know that thank you for following the rules. Reward them now for getting back on track and putting Y again, or starting selecting Y if that's the case, right? And you can even think about the other example where the first individual started with the X, the defecting, right? The team forgave them as they keep playing and realized the player understood the rules all the way to round 10, right? So it's very important if you engage in tit for tat strategy that you are nice and fair in the very beginning. Do not start off immediately defecting, but when they do defect and you want to punish them, make sure that it's clear and transparent that they have clearly violated the agreements of the negotiation, that you are also firm and provocable in this approach. And firm mean, hey, I'm going to engage in Y until you act right. And when you act right, then we can be more forgiving. And then we can start negotiating in a fair process. Do remember there's a very thin line of how you retaliate and punish the players who defect. You need to make sure you're still fair, you're clear in your communication, and that you're also being respectable to each other and also sharing how can that person benefit from cooperating rather than defecting, right? And so I asked the question, how might you use this relation to your real life negotiations? I can think about other examples where I have students in classrooms and we have our negotiation agreement. One particular course I did where we set up a negotiation with their grades. And if they did X, Y, and Z, then they'll get this particular letter grade. In return, I will engage in 1, 2, and 3. And engage doesn't mean that I will provide slide decks at least 3 days in advance for them. I will give them practice quizzes that is not graded. In essence, they can fail it, but it's about learning the practice quiz. So those were the exchanges. And in their return, they are supposed to read the chapter in advance. They are to submit discussion questions in advance before we start a meeting. Now, what happened when a student does not engage in those activities that we agreed upon, which is submitting discussion questions. So what I did in return is I emailed the student directly and I said, I've noticed that you didn't submit your discussion question. It's very important that you submit those discussion questions because of one, it'll guarantee or at least help earn your A that you want for this course. And also remember, this is what we agreed upon in the beginning. And most importantly, developing these discussion questions really do help sink in the contents that you're reading, which is deeper learning and help you be more prepared in your exam and get the grade that you want, right? So that's my way of like reminding them that they violated a rule or an agreement that we had. Now, that's a quick and clear and transparent way to remind them. You're like, well, how did you punish them? Another way that I used to do it is I would come to class in the very beginning and I would call out their names and say, hey, Regina, Amit did not submit their discussion questions for this week as they should have compared to the rest of you who did do it on time, right? And that's that social public announcement is enough for people because people want a positive image. People want to look like they're a team player. So show that they are not engaging in team player in a way that's visible to others, where it's also still respectable, but yet give them the opportunity to adjust and behave correctly. So then the next time I meet, I can say, or I can also email Amit or Regina directly and say, I noticed that you submitted your questions early this week compared to last week. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Just recognizing their changes from their last behavior when they defected or did something improper from the rules of the agreement for the negotiation can also be a great strategy. And then I forgave and we all moved on and these students did really well. So Amit, Regina, you did great. You got an A, right? So I'm just using an example here. Regina said, with your team, you may also use this tit for tat strategy. Absolutely. Be kind in the process, but be firm. That's a really important thing to remember as you go through this, because you don't want to be the punisher where they retaliate even more and become more resistant. Do know how to communicate with your counterparts, the people who are defecting, right? So what do we learn from this particular activity? That people tend to be very self-interest. And a way to combat that is really focus on the short-term impact and direct benefits they can get out of it, but also notice that if it's a short-term negotiation process, defecting is probably most effective compared to long-term types of negotiation. The first move matters because it sets the tone. It lets the other players know how you're thinking, whether you trust them. So always try to cooperate first rather than always being the defector in the initial stage of the negotiation process. If you're wondering what that looks like, it can be just being open-minded, listening. So those elements that we talked about or you put in the chat box earlier, asking questions in the very beginning. And communicating what is important to you, what is it that you expect from them, what is it that you're willing to commit to, what are the things that you want out of this negotiation process in order to really build that trust that you want during this process. And you're probably wondering, well, how do we really build trust authentically or organically? Because some trust doesn't happen as easy for others. And how do we really build or foster trust in the negotiation? Steve asked the question, how do you negotiate if a defector is a contrarian? Could you explain a little bit on that, Steve? Regina said, how do you influence the counterpart to stop defecting all the time, right? So the other part, we mentioned the communication factor of sharing what could they benefit from not defecting. So reframing it to saying stop defecting, but focusing on cooperating. The critical mass is important. So even if this group all selected Y, they're like, well, eventually this person will pick up. And if by the second round they have not picked up, then the critical mass need to also punish that particular person as well. So you all can defect as well and engage in tit for tat strategy until this person engage into cooperation. And you want to make it clear that your group have agreed to work collaboratively against this one person. And that usually does not make a person feel any better, and usually tend to respond differently than saying, I'm going to make sure I stay defecting. No one really wants to stand out as much as we think we do. We become much more cooperative when there's a group and we're the only one doing something different. Steve said, just a person who wants to do the opposite. Like, oh, you mean like just naturally, like the contrary, like that's just their natural tendencies to want to be a resistor. Okay, I got your question. Well, Steve, this is part where you probably can engage in the inquisitive approach, right? Asking questions. So let's say you're engaging with Leticia, and Leticia is your resistor. And Leticia, I'm only picking you because you were the last one right before Regina. And you may want to just ask, Leticia, what is it that you really want out of this negotiation or this process? What are your hesitations? What are your worries? What do you think could go wrong with this negotiation? What is the least amount that you get that will make you unsatisfied? Trying asking those questions can help you understand why a person chooses to be a resistor, why a person chooses to not cooperate, because there's going to be things that they're worried about and they may be unsure about it. And when you ask those questions and they respond to your questions, one, it allows them to think, wow, Steve really wants to know why I'm engaging in this, rather than attacking me or retaliating or punishing me here. He wants to take time to understand, why am I engaging in these behaviors? Why am I doing this? And also it allow me to understand why I'm doing this too. And then together, Steve, Leticia can come together and really brainstorm or figure out what could be things that could help and make you want to cooperate. It sounds like it's not just about the person wanting to naturally resist or do the contrary. Is about why don't they, right? What are those hesitations? What are the things that they're worried about? Why is it that they defect first? And sometimes it go back to trust. So remember the fear of betrayal. If you were the one that chose X immediately, you probably had a history or past experience of engaging in negotiation with others, or not just negotiation, just maybe betrayal the moment you open up and share information. You've had past experience, someone breaking your trust. So you're less likely to cooperate in the beginning. Again, ways to really help this, and Steve, this is going to help you a lot, is start with trust. That's going to help the person do the opposite, because once trust is built, you're going to be on the same wavelength and the same mindset and direction of where you want the negotiation to go. And then you'll be able to be cooperative and collude if that's the case, if necessary, right? So the other thing you can do to help them is liking, and that's the part that some of you mentioned in the chat box. So Steve, in addition to trust, is how can I get that person to like me? People who like you are less going to do the opposite, right? They want to collaborate. They want to engage with you. And just remember that liking goes a long way. So I share this quote just by saying that if people like you, they'll listen to you, right? So they'll be able to communicate more effectively. But if they trust you, they also will do business with you. So liking and trust must go hand in hand. And it's so important to build in the very early stage of the negotiation relationship. Blanca said, I wanted to ask if I could receive the instructions of the buyer in 67 Pine Lane now that exercise is done. What particular instructions are you talking about? Are we talking about the debriefing? So how about you send me an email just to remind me, both of you, and then clarify which instructions that you want from it. And I'll be happy to share what I have available to share with you, right? So here's a trust equation that was developed by Meister. And what I want you to tell me is, in the chat box, what do you think the C, the R, the I, and the S stand for, all right? So we know what the T stands for. The T stands for trust, and the P stands for the probability. Well, so in essence, what elements will increase the likelihood of leading to trust, right? In essence, increasing the probability of trust. So we have, Lokesh said, C stands for communication. Neha said cooperation, right? Saravi said cooperation as well. Leticia said collaboration. Christian said R for relation. Nadeem said C for credibility. Ding, ding, ding. Absolutely, Nadeem. C for credibility. What about the R, the I, and the S? Sumitra said reciprocity. All right. Anybody else? Respect by Alexandra. Risk by Marilla. Anna said respect as well. Neha said relations, all right? No one said yet. What about I? Return of investment, right? Ah said interest, and Dean said interest as well. Anna said information. Neha said integrity, influence. We're almost there. Remember, the key word is relationship, right? That is so important in order to build trust, right? So what could I stand for? Interest, okay? A little bit of the S could actually that focus more on the S, the I, the interest part of it. So let me go ahead and just break it with you. Okay. Credibility, reliability, intimacy, look, I said, all right there on time, almost there. And then interest, self-orientation. So if you put interest, you think of self-interest. So in this equation, we want self-orientation or self-interest to be low, okay? And we want credibility, reliability, intimacy to be high. Credibility is about status. Credibility is about expertise, competency, and also, for instance, knowledge, right? So the more knowledgeable, the more prepared you are, the more credible you are, right? So if I'm an expert in an area, my credibility is going to go up. So therefore, my trust in you is going to go up. You think about a doctor, more credibility because in terms of diagnosing and treatments, I'm going to trust that you know what you're talking about because you have the medical degree. Reliability is essence that what you say you're actually going to do. You're consistent in your behavior. You're dependable. The agreements or the terms that we've set forth in the negotiation is something that you follow and respect. That's what reliability is. Intimacy is our connection, right? How much likeness and similarity we have between each other, and also the comfortableness of sharing important information to you, sharing of information that is sensitive to me and that makes me feel vulnerable, but I'm comfortable sharing that with you. So remember all those other elements we talked about and where natural cooperation doesn't happen because of vulnerability and strong emotions. Having credibility, reliability, and intimacy being at the highest level possible really does foster trust while not just focusing on yourself, but focusing on the person who's the resistor, focusing on the person who's the contractor, Steve. That's the person who's wanting to go the opposite, right? Focusing on your counterparts. What are their interests? Taking a moment to listen. And how do we really do that? Is by how we behave and what we do, and also by the questions that we ask in order to really engage in deeper understanding about each other and less focused just on what I want out of this negotiation process. But what do you want, and out of this process? What do you want, Neha, out of this process, right? And that moment of just asking, not so broadly, but a little bit more specific, and sometimes reframing their questions and comments can also be helpful during this time. Okay, so lower self-interest or self-orientation and higher credibility, reliability, and intimacy in order to build trust. Okay, so from your past experience, what are some barriers for you in building trust for or by others? So in the chat box, tell me, what are some past experience that you had that created barriers for you into building trust for others or by others? So what led to this current situation you have now, or the current moment? What are some of these, past moments, events that led to you having difficulties trusting others or building trust, right? So first said bad attitude from my counterpart. Audie said just strangers. I don't know you, right? I mean, how can I trust you if I don't know you? Neha said perceptions created by others. Christian said first impression. All right, if their first impression was just too intense. Diego said the counterpart's mentality is just a win-win mentality, right? Do not have a counterpart win-win mentality. So that self-orientation is really high from them, Diego, is that what you're suggesting? Matthew said if the price is too high, again, self-interest, self-orientation, they're only focusing on what they get out of this, right? Using information that's shared against me, absolutely. Leticia going back to self-interest, different cultures, different assumptions, mindsets, and learning how to navigate those spaces. Bhavna said feedback from others. Suna said just the uncertainty, right? I just don't know what to expect. I don't know you, okay? Never having a reciprocity approach. Wow, very good, Regina. Understanding, explaining the mindset, lack of transparency, what one Lauren, Freddie said, perception based on past experience, and Steve said suspicions of each other. So trust, just general trust. But all of it starts with what? Communication and getting to know each other. You all going to start at the point where you're strangers. Strangers have to build some kind of relationship, some foundation. Small talk goes a long way in this case. If you're not really good with small talk, that's absolutely fine. But maybe you can just start engaging in questions. I know a lot of people go, I'm not really good on those small talks. Maybe you're the one that are inquisitive. You ask a lot of questions. Asking questions that are open-ended and willing to actually understand the partners is a great way to build trust. I like to say there's two types of people who trust, right? Or do not trust, right? There's the person who I am going to trust you automatically, okay? Until you do something that makes me not want to trust you, then I will not trust you, right? So that's person one. Then there's person two. Person two is I don't trust anyone. You have to earn my trust, right? And that's where you kind of want to go, all right, I have to do things in order to build trust with this person. Thanks, Oz. We're almost done. We're 5 minutes at the ask end, but thank you for staying as long as possible for this webinar. Knowing what type of person you are, you person one or person two, is going to help you engage in more open and powerful and meaningful negotiation processes, right? And then also taking the time to understand your partner's trust. Are they person one or person two, right? So take the time and really understand each of your counterparts' trust and where you are on trust. So elements of trust can build on expectations, understanding each other's expectations, risk when there's higher risk. When one of you are willing to take a risk, the other person can build trust off of that. Uncertainty, when there's a lot of uncertainty and you're willing to kind of share information and you're engaging in behaviors that are much more open, then the person can also build trust from you, right? I know we're running out of time. We're up to the hour, so I'm going to kind of go through these slides a little bit more quick. The last element is sharing of information. The more information you share, the more that people can trust you. And not just any kind of information. We're talking about also personal information, things that you really care about through this process. Like, I really want this car because this car is going to help me take my mother to the hospital, and it allows it to stretch and fit these things and equipment in there. So willing to share information will also get a reciprocal action. So they'll start sharing information with you as well. Invest in time to each other. Really, when you ask questions, don't just ask questions. Take the time to listen and hear what they have to say. And make concessions. Give a little so you can also get a little too through the process, all right? So do not always just take, but also give. But also be very careful about giving too much as well. Don't give too much, because then there is the abuse of power and also higher chance of being betrayed at the end. Reshma said, is there a case where someone offered an extremely high price for something and the seller says that's too high, but I'm only expecting so much and I want to give it to you for this amount? You could say that, but we're going to talk about a little bit why anchoring an initial offering very early on can be more damaging than it is being beneficial. So when you start offering prices or amounts, you don't want to do it very early on, and we're going to talk about that in a second. In this particular slide, so Rashma, hold on to that thought. When will or can I trust them, right? You want to make sure that others can depend on you, and that's that reliability. Building concessions I mentioned earlier, knowing how to be helpful, and understanding the other partners is very important in terms of what are their norms, their standards, their ways of doing things. And that's that cultural difference that one of you mentioned earlier, and why trust is not something easily built upon, is because of cultural differences. So again, going back, I think Lokesh mentioned that. Going back, taking time, listening, understanding what are their patterns and way of doing things is really going to help you build trust. All these elements, strategies that I share in this particular slide are research, evidence-based practices that have been done. So go through each one of these points and see which one you find that is more suiting for you, that you can engage in organically and authentically. Don't do something that you're not comfortable with. Do something that you're comfortable with that fits your personality. Otherwise, it will come across inauthentic to your counterparts. So at the end of this, I want to just share that we naturally want to engage and trust, right? But we have to make sure that we allow others to see the power and benefit of trusting each other. So, that's the good news. We all want to trust each other, right? I'm almost done. We're on the last slide, so we're on the last 2 minutes. The last activity you did was 67 Fish Pond Lane, and this is where you engage in distributive bargaining, where you learn to set your BATNA, your aspiration, your reservation values, and understand the power of your self-interest as well as others' self-interest in order to engage in individual profits. And how do you really do that, right? You say, well, identify the focal points and what are the objective criteria in order to set my reservation aspiration values as well as my best alternative negotiation agreement. So what is your BATNA that's better for you and better for others as well? And figuring out where the ZOPA is, right? The zone of possible agreement. So how do we really identify that? So use this model. One of the things I want to mention is when you determine your aspiration value, make sure you do your preparation. This is where your preparation comes into play. Make sure you're confident in yourself. It's so important that you set realistic and not too low aspiration values, because otherwise you'll leave feeling unsatisfied even if you met your ZOPA. So it's so important that you set your aspiration value in a realistic and aspiring element and level, okay? Nadeem say, I take that this webinar presentation will be shared just like the previous one. Absolutely, it will be available right on Canvas for you. All right, so let's take a quick poll. I want to do, if you're interested in claiming value, what is the very first step one should do? So the poll is going to pop up real quick. I love the chat boxes and the comments, but I think it actually took up most of our time at the very beginning. So we're going to go through these slides really quick. So a poll is going to pop up. Tell me, if you are interested in claiming value, what is the very first step one should do? Is it make the first offer, set my realistic value, determine my BATNA, know my objectives or criteria, identify my optimistic yet justifiable aspiration value? If the poll's not popping up with you, that's fine. Just put it into the chat box, okay? So what is your very first step that you would do if you're interested in claiming value, right? So we have some responses. Diego said all of them, yes, but the very first step, what is the very first step that you would do, Diego? All right, so the poll should be up. Go ahead and make your selection. The very first step you would do if you're interested in claiming value. All right, so let's see. Bianca said optimistic with a smiley face. It's a great way to kind of put it next to each other, right? All right, let's see what the results look like. And if you didn't get to vote, that's absolutely fine. So let's see what you selected in your poll. Waiting for the results to pop up for me, if you're wondering what I'm doing here. Okay. All right. No results from the team support. Can I see the results? There we go. And 42% of you said they're BATNA, 23% of you said focal points, and then the others said make the first offer. Some said realistic reservation values and the aspiration values. All right, so which one is really the best step? And if you've heard my comment that I mentioned earlier about making first offers, you should know that that should not be the very first step, right? So the very first step, it actually is what many of you put here, San Diego, Diego, Diva, is your BATNA. You should identify your BATNA first before you go on to developing your reservation, your aspiration values, or even identifying your objective criteria. Then you make your offer. After you do all of that, that's when the offer comes into play. Mind you, it goes the same way when you think about relationship building. Create some relationship foundation. Get to know your counterparts, ask questions, listen, divulge information, then make an offer. But do not make an offer so early on before you actually understood what could possibly be their aspiration values, what could possibly be their reservation values. It's not just about yours, but also identifying theirs as well as you go through it. Alexandra said there's something about one of the articles that I read that said there's no negotiation possible if you can't get out. Yes. You have to know what is the out game, right? If you can't get out, so you must start with your BATNA. If there's no idea what's your plan B, you're already starting off at a losing game for yourself, okay? The next poll is, how satisfied were you with your negotiation outcomes? This doesn't have to be the 67 fish pond lane. This can be in any negotiation activity. On general, what is your satisfaction level with negotiation when you finish it? Are you very satisfied to very unsatisfied? On general, I mean, in general, how satisfied are you with your negotiation activities that you engage in? Doesn't have to be the one from IDG or this course. Just generally, when you are in negotiation, how satisfied are you? All right, so let's take a look at the results. Satisfied, satisfied, fantastic. And let's see what we have. So 68% of you said satisfied. We have some that are very satisfied and some that are unsatisfied, right? We can't see the poll. No worries, Neha. It was just the same thing that you see on the screen. But I want to talk about just what influenced your level of satisfaction. And for those who selected very satisfied to satisfied, it means that possibly you perceive that the negotiation process is fair. You felt like you trust your counterparts, that you were able to address some of the assumptions that you may both have during the negotiation, and even your own assumptions about your negotiation skills. But there's ways to become more satisfied with your negotiation. Is one, make sure you don't settle below your own reservations price, right? Even if it's in the zone of possible agreement result, but you want to make sure that you set realistic reservation values and aspiring aspiration values as well. You don't want to just get rid of it because you want it sold, right? You want to make sure that you're engaging in something that you actually are going to be happy with. And that means the outcome. And if it's not, then you will have your BATNA to be the point that you're still equally satisfied with. So make sure that you set a realistic, satisfying BATNA as well, right? So with 67 Fish Pond Lane, what is the main things you've got from it? I hope that you were able to understand that confidence is important. If I didn't emphasize that enough in the aspiration value, you must have confidence in order to set some realistic aspiring values from aspiration to reservation. Understand that there are always going to be problems, and that from the people side of it, that people have emotions, it's important to communicate, talk, and discover both parties' interests. That means the aspiration as well as the reservation, in order to uncover the focal points through this negotiation process. And then able to reach a mutual gain, hopefully be able to actually leave with an agreement or a negotiation. So the very last slide and the very last slide deck, and I want to appreciate everybody who has maintained to stay on this webinar with me. I appreciate so much. Tell me, what is the most challenging aspect of negotiation that you've found so far the past 4 weeks? Is it one, asserting your interests, managing your emotions, taking time to understanding others parties' emotions and motivation, recognizing how to create value, establishing trust, dealing with people who have different styles than you, getting the maximum out of the agreement, or just managing the negotiation as a whole? Neha said scheduling. Absolutely, scheduling is really hard, right? So let's see what your poll results are. Scheduling is probably the hardest one. I absolutely understand and can relate. All right, let's see. What is the most challenging one that you selected in your results? And the purpose of this poll really is for you to take a moment and say, now I identify the challenging aspects of negotiation for me. What am I going to do differently? Because negotiation, again, effective negotiation is about practicing the elements of negotiation that you find most challenging, all right? I didn't see the results support. There we go. So 27% of you said capitalizing, creating value. So week 5 is all about that. So you're going to hopefully practice this element of negotiation. The other 20% of you said negotiating with different styles, and then getting the maximum possible out of the agreement. Fantastic. Week 5 and week 6 and 8 and so on are going to focus on how to create value, how to gain more positive relationships during your negotiation. That subjective value is what week 5 is going to cover. So I am so excited. Those are the aspects that you selected for this particular challenge you're experiencing. And I hope that you will continue challenging yourself, taking risks. And I appreciate again for your patience on IDG. We didn't get to cover some of the tips. So one of them is, I mentioned already, using Slack as being the other form of communication, emailing, communicating with each other, giving each other heads up, and reading the instructions very carefully, and also the emails that I send out just to give you some other tips. So I'll send the IDG tips via email post-webinar. And as always, I appreciate your patience and generosity. Continue with your insightful comments and discussions, and challenge yourself even more for new experiences. And I hope that you have an exciting week 5 as you continue on with the course. And thank you for your time, patience, and participation in this webinar. Looking forward to seeing you in our final webinar together. And I really don't know if I have much of a voice left. So thank you, Diego, Neha, Ramia, Regina, Leticia, everyone who participated in today's discussions, conversations. So appreciative of it. So thank you. Email me if you need anything, absolutely, what you've discussed in the chat box. Thank you, Anna, Batu, San Diego. Enjoy the rest of your day. If this is the beginning for you, in the morning, if it's the evening, good night, and have a great rest of the course until we see each other for the final. Thank you, everyone. Bye. Thank you, Steve. You can email me right on Canvas, Steve. Contact me on the email inbox. My email address should pop up right there. Right. Thanks, Philippa. Thanks, Sunil. Have a good one. Thank you, everybody.